Hey, welcome back everybody. To start this video, I want to show you a couple of Pontiac blocks here. When we start talking about Pontiacs, I had an incident recently with someone that's making claims about Pontiac blocks, and I want to kind of make a video to make sure that we just clear all that up. So on the left here we have a 455 Pontiac. This is a 455 Pontiac engine block. Next to it we have a 350 Pontiac block. Next to those, I've taken one of the heads off of the 350 and one of the heads off of the 455, and I put them side by side. Now, one thing I want you to note, if you watch the big block, small block video, we saw a dramatic difference between the big block and the small block Chevy. But if we look at these Pontiac engines, what we notice is, even though the cubic inches are very different, the components, the cylinder heads, the blocks, and so forth, are dimensionally exactly the same size. So if you look at these blocks side by side, you're hard-pressed to find any differences in these blocks. Size-wise, that's because there is no difference. So what we have is we have varying cubic inches, dramatic cubic inch differences in many cases with some of these blocks, like we'll talk about here in a little bit. But we have a block that was basically the same size for all of the engines. So therefore, the point that we want to drive home here is that Pontiac did not make a big block and a small block. They made different cubic inches, they made different bore sizes, they had different bore and stroke combinations, but basically all of their blocks were the same size. So there is no Pontiac big block or Pontiac small block. It's just a Pontiac. And so take a real good look. You can pause this if you want. If we actually take a tape measure and we measure the dimensions here of this block, the physical dimensions of these blocks, they're exactly the same, even though the cubic inches vary a lot. Same thing with the heads. Those heads will bolt on either block, although you probably don't want to mix and match them because you may have performance issues. So I wanted to make sure that I drove this home before I got to the rest of the video. Okay, so we've got you saw the video of the Pontiac blocks. Now let me try to break down the Pontiacs for you so you know just exactly what you're dealing with. So what we want to do is we want to start, now there's a lot of different Pontiacs, cubic inch sizes over the years, and some of the bigger engines were made during the earlier years and so forth, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the smallest cubic inch first, and certainly there are other Pontiac engines if you go all the way back to the 50s and so forth. We're not going to do that. We're going to deal with stuff that's kind of relevant today that you may see, even though this stuff, a lot of this stuff is actually pretty old. We're going to deal with stuff that is probably out there somewhere. So first of all, they had a really small engine. It was a 265 cubic inch engine. It was only made for 2 years, from 1980 and 81. Now, this was a poor performing engine. It was just basically a bone stock, small smogger cubic inch engine that they put in some of the cars that they made in the early 80s. The thing about this engine though is it has the same block size as the rest of the Pontiac engine. So it's not a big block or a small block. It did have a shorter deck height, but for the most part it's basically a very similar block. The heads are interchangeable. You can bolt 455 heads onto it if you wanted to, although you wouldn't want to do that. It had a bore of 3 3/4 inch and a 3-inch stroke. So it had a small bore, small stroke, low performance smog motor. Okay, same block size. I had an exchange with someone. There's a big misconception about Pontiacs. There's a lot of people out there that think, well, I got a 400 or I got a 455 Pontiac, it's a big block. No, it isn't. It's just a Pontiac. I got into, on my other video where I have, I do big block and small block Chevys, if you watch that, you can see there's a dramatic difference in the physical dimensions of the block. So I had a viewer, he posts on there and he says, well, you're wrong, Pontiac has a big block. And you know, I don't want to get into an argument with anybody, and I don't want to, I don't have to prove that I'm right and just get into this big old, this match about who knows more, whatever. Whatever. I told the guy, and I was nice to him. I said, look, there are no big block. Who decides whether an engine line has a big block and a small block? Who decides that? Well, the engineers who designed it. The Chevrolet engineers said, hey, this is our small block, this is our big block. They designated that when they designed the engine. Pontiac has never done that. They never said, this is a big block, this is a small block. So I was nice to the guy. I tried to explain that. I even put links to websites from reputable shops who build Pontiacs, proof that they really never had a big block and a small block designation, and he refused to listen. He said, I've worked on Trans Ams for so many years and I know it's a big block. Well, it's not a big block. He just wants it to be a big block. He wants to be able to say, hey, I got a big block Pontiac, when in reality he doesn't even know what he's talking about. So he just kept criticizing and calling me names and using profanity. So I actually had to ban him from the channel and delete his post, because I don't really have time to deal with just people that act like they're in junior high. I'm not dealing with that. This is a serious YouTube channel if you want to talk automotive stuff. And by the way, if you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, anytime you go into a machine shop or any type of performance atmosphere, never tell them you have a big block Pontiac, because honestly they're going to think you're an idiot. Okay, so I'm just telling you like it is. So then we have the 301. We go up in cubic inches, the 301, 301 cubic inch engine. Well, the 301 was Pontiac's attempt at making a smog / performance engine, and it was a miserable failure. Very underpowered engine, very weak bottom end, really didn't have crankshaft that was strong or a block that could handle any power. They made a turbo version of it to try to get a little bit of horsepower, but basically it was a piece of junk. It had 4-inch bore and a 3-inch stroke, very weak block, but it is the same block size. It is not a big block or a small block, it is just a Pontiac. Okay, so then we move on here, get rid of that. Pontiac did make what they call a 303. Now this was never a production engine. It was 303 cubic inches, and it was made for the Trans Am Racing Series. It had a 4.125 bore and a 2.840 stroke. Very short stroke, very big bore. This was a hot rod engine. It was never produced for the public. It was used for racing only, and it produced 475 horsepower. It was an all-out race motor. Basically, same block size, same deck height as the 301, but it was the same block size. Okay. Then the 326, 326 cubic inches. This was produced in 1963 to 67. Very good engine. Had a 3.720 bore and a 3 3/4 inch stroke. Pay attention to that 3.750 stroke. This was a decent V8. Same block size as all the rest of them. Not a big block, not a small block. Okay, then we come up, they also made a 350 from 68 to 76. Pontiac had a 350 cubic inch motor. It was a 3 3/4 inch 3.750 stroke, same stroke as the 326. Increased the bore size to 3.875, made a 350. It was an okay motor. They did have a couple high performance versions of it that were okay. Not a bad motor, not a great motor either. It's just kind of mediocre. The 389, 1959 to 1966, very good engine. This was the engine they used in the GTOs up until 1966 or 67, something like that. 59 to 66 is the information I got. Had a 4.062 bore and a 3.750 stroke, same stroke size, Same block size, okay, they're all the same. So then we move up to the 400 cubic inch. Very, very good engine, one of the staples of the Pontiac Performance division. This was a 4.122 bore and a 3.750 stroke. It's basically a bored out 389. Same block size, very good engine, lots of options. They made that from 67 to 78. There's still a lot of those available today. If you want to build a performance Pontiac engine, I highly recommend you try to find a 400. Very good engine. The 421, there was a 421 cubic inch built. Now this was only made for a couple of years back in the early 60s. This was considered a good performance engine. It was available from as an option in some of the bigger cars. Same block size as all the rest of them I've talked about. Okay, the blocks were the same. We go from there to the 428. In 1967 through 69, they made a 428 cubic inch engine. It had a 4.120 bore and a 4-inch stroke. Okay, very good engine, good performance engine. Same block size as all the rest of them. If you compared them to these blocks we have sitting here, they'd look exactly the same. They bored that engine out starting in 1970 to a 455 cubic inch, 4.150 bore and a 4-inch stroke, and it is the same block size as all the rest of them. This is a very good engine, probably one of the best performance engines they made. Lots of torque. They were underrated from the factory. Most of them, the performance versions, had over 500 foot-pounds of torque from the factory, although they didn't rate them that way for insurance purposes. So that's basically Pontiacs in a nutshell. Pontiac engines are very good engines, especially if you get the right version of this motor, the 400s or the 455s. Very, very strong running engines. You can build the gills out of them. The cranks are strong, the blocks are strong, the rods are decent, and there's a lot of aftermarket parts for them. So that's basically what you have. But again, I just want to reiterate, make sure that you don't go around talking about your big block Pontiac, even if you have a 455, because people that know these engines are just, they may not say anything to you, but in their mind they're going to think this guy has no clue what he's talking about. So what we want is we want to put information out there that's correct. We want to make statements that make sense when we talk. We want people to know that we know what we're talking about. We don't want people to look at us and kind of go, I don't know about this guy. Okay, so that's the facts. That's what it is. If you don't believe me, research it online. Get on websites for shops and companies that build Pontiac engines on a regular basis, and they will confirm what I say. If you get into an argument or you get into a dispute with somebody online and they insist that their Pontiac is a big block or they made big blocks and small blocks, they don't even know what they're talking about. Just don't waste your time with those guys, because you're not going to convince them. They just want their Pontiacs to be big blocks. So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions or you have any issues with this video, be sure to engage in dialogue with me. Keep it clean. Don't cuss at me. Don't swear at me. Don't call me names like you're a 2-year-old, okay? Because I'm just going to delete your post. This is for serious automotive people. So hopefully that makes sense, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.